So hello everyone, and welcome to this semester's final reading in the College Chapel, sponsored by the Department of the School of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences and Berry College. I'm Meredith, a creative writing major senior, and today I have the absolute pleasure of introducing you to the wonderful and talented Kimberly Garza. Before we begin, and additionally, I would like to let you know that our speaker will be available after the reading to answer any questions you might have and to sign copies of her book. If you don't already have a copy of the book, then she will also be selling those after the reading as well, so you can get something up and get a sign at the same time. Wonderful. Our reader tonight, Kimberly Garza, is a native Texan who received her degrees in English, Spanish, and creative writing from the University of Texas at Boston, and earned her PhD at the University of North Texas in 2019. That might be familiar to you as the same place where our good friend Dr. Clint Peters earned his degree. Her work in both fiction and nonfiction has appeared in journals such as Cop and Nickel, Puerto del Sol, Creative Nonfiction, and Tri-Quarterly, as well as others. She currently works as an assistant professor of creative writing at the University of Texas at San Antonio. Kim's first novel, titled The Last Caracas, debuted in August of 2022 and was listed as a New York Times Editor's Pick novel and on Audible's Best of 2022 list. The Last Caracas is, at its core, a love letter to the city of Galveston, Texas, where the work takes place. In prose that reviewers call striking and evocative, Garza tells the story of a young woman's struggle with identity, belonging, and the meaning of home, as the primarily Filipino and Mexican neighborhood of Fish Village prepares for the touchdown of Hurricane Ike in 2008. In a modern political landscape where immigration and native identity are extremely hot-button issues, Garza manages to draw the eyes of the reader beyond the national debate and instead to the people at its heart, as the Filipino chorus starts near the beginning of the novel with "See Us." More personally, though, The Last Caracas confronts the ideas of home in a way that I think most of us as college students can relate to. Many of us have felt the longing to leave our hometown and experience a new life elsewhere, as Carly, the protagonist does in this novel, which may be why we came to Berry. Others of us may feel the irresistible pull of home that prevents you from straying too far away, like Jess, another character. Whatever your personal relationship with the place may be, The Last Caracas confronts the ties that bind us to our roots with rich, compelling prose and a story about the importance of community. It is now my honor to introduce Kimberly Garza.
Whoa, I don't know I'm supposed to follow that. Thank you, Meredith. Hello, Mary. Thank you for having me. I'm so pleased to be here. I'm a little too Catholic. I think I came up here and I was waiting to like genuflect, and I feel like I'm supposed to give the first reading now. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank you to Barry for inviting me, to my good friend Clint Peters for having me and for arranging all of this, and thank you all for being here. So what I thought I would do is read from 3 sections of the novel. It is a novel in stories if you haven't read it, so don't be like my dad and kind of freak out, though, where are the chapters? It is told in stories from a number of characters who have deep ties, one way or another, to this particular neighborhood in Galveston called Fish Village, which is a real neighborhood. And what I thought I'd do is read a bit from the beginning, just to give you a taste for how the novel starts, and then read the next chapter after that, which is about Carly, who is at the heart of the novel. It is a big cast of characters, but also orbit around Carly Castillo. And then I thought I'd read a bit from one of the last stories, which is when Hurricane Ike actually hits. It's from the point of view of a different character. And then I'll kind of speak in the middle, in between, and give you some context that you might need to know. So I thought I'd start then. So let me keep an eye on my time. And I thought I would start with, just this bit. Can you still hear me? You good with sound? Okay. I'll read a bit from the beginning. So this is from the first chapter, which is a story called The Queens of Santo Niño. In the parking lot of Sacred Heart Catholic Church in the cool dusk, which is a lie already because it is never never really cool, even on this January evening, since this is Texas, and more specifically, this is Galveston. We wait. We stand on the concrete, ducking into windows of one another's parked cars to chat, or we sit inside with the AC blasting, or we lean against the walls and watch twilight draw shadows like a dark veil around the church. We are there before even the priest arrives to unlock the doors, or the volunteer choir sets up their amps and microphone stands. We prowl for things to do, tasks to help with. Some of us, like Yoli Sandoval and Tagay Macasantos, cart in vases of flowers from our new Buicks. Some of us, like Gloria Rivera or Marlo Suwayan, arrive in hand-me-down Hondas with roses clipped from our backyard bushes, red, always red, for the holy day. We arrange flowers on the altar or at the feet of the Blessed Mother's statue or beside the portrait of the Sacred Heart of Jesus for whom this church is named. When we think about that, we place more flowers by the portrait. Some of us, humming with the energy of Santo Niño Feast Day, buzz about distributing paper programs, the programs we have used since we started this event many years ago. Farther away. Oh, okay.
Not your
Is that better?
I think so.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you. Okay, here we go. All right. The pamphlets are battered, creased from our hands, pocked by ink blots and typos, where we list the schedule of the Mass, the Tagalog prayers we will say together, the Tagalog songs we will sing. We place copies in each pew. We sit or kneel on the cushions, our fingers pressed to rosary beads. We tune our guitars and warble a few chords of the opening song, O Santo Niño Marique, Sanggol na handog ng langit. Our voices in song or in gossip echo in every corner of the Catholic Church on Broadway and 13th, which had been quiet before we arrived. We do very little quietly, and yet we quiet when Maharlika Castillo walks in. We turn to watch, she has that effect. She strides into Sacred Heart purposefully with her daughter, Carly, is that her name? Yes, by the hand. Hello, we call out to them and ask Maharlika, Kumusta ka na? I'm fine, she replies in pointed English. We flinch, we can't help it. Her English is sharp, intentional, a knife aimed at us. From her new crooked smile that shows teeth to this language she chooses in place of ours, she has built an arsenal. She wages war against us and the world. Once she was kind to us. When she arrived, she found us almost immediately, as every FOB does, bonding first with the ones who worked at the hospital. We walked her through the corridors and buildings of John Seeley and the larger complex, taught her where the supply closets and cafeterias were, where to purchase scrubs, how to update charts and input medical data for UTMB system-wide. We instructed her on the Spanish phrases she would need to learn. ¿Cómo se escribe su nombre? ¿Tiene seguro médico? In our homes, we passed her platters of sticky rice and whole fish fried crisp. When she wept with homesickness, we rubbed her shoulders, shushing her as we too had once needed. And on this feast day, the one day of the year when the Filipino community emerges from every sweaty corner of Galveston to unite and honor our patron saint, Maharlika was always there. She read at the podium, sang in the choir, served plates of pancit and adobo at the after party. Was it just 2 years ago that she was last here, that she was one of us? Maharlika, we used to say with admiration, marveling at the rare, beautiful name that means in our tongue something akin to nobility, to being of a line with royal blood. Maharlika. But she is exalted now, or thinks she is. That is probably our fault. She washed up on this island with a nursing degree and a job at the hospital, despite having never set foot in America before. We thought she was embracing a new life, as we had. Unlike us, she had family here, her mother, who had immigrated long before. We did not really know her mother, and when she died of cancer not long after Maharlika arrived, we felt no sorrow, but we went dutifully to her funeral mass, prayed the novena for her in Maharlika's apartment in Fish Village. We should have noticed it then, but we didn't. Should have seen the shape Maharlika's grief took. Curled up sideways on the couch, cheek to the padded arm, slippered feet tucked beneath her as if she hadn't the energy to take her shoes off. How she burst into sobs in the middle of shift change meetings or standing in the Walmart checkout line. We should have seen that her grief was lasting. We did not expect that when the next loss came, her man, it would shift again, reshape itself into a grief for the old ways, her old lives in which she belonged to someone. A mother, a man, a country, when she was a child of something tangible in the world. Years from now, it will seem so obvious to us that she was never meant to be a mother or an immigrant. So I'm going to skip forward a bit. That's from the beginning, which, as you can hear, is about it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like Carly's origin story, really. Carly's going to be the main character, or one of the main characters in the rest of the book. But it's significant to know that where she comes from, which is a mother parents who left her, and a mother who left her to go back to the Philippines. And so what I'll do now is read from the second chapter, which is Carly as a teenager, and we get to see a bit more of who she's going to be like. She's now being raised by her paternal grandmother, whose name is Magdalena, and this is long after Maharlika and her father Marcos have left. So this is Carly as a teenager. She's going to get into some trouble, and we're going to see her in Galveston. So this is from Ignition. She isn't sure what triggers it, why her bubbling anger geysers up and out. At first the fight is all noise. Carly screaming, "I'm going and you can't stop me." Her grandmother hollering back, "You're not going anywhere, ¿me entiendes?" Their voices spiraling in a shrill kind of harmony. "Yes, I am. No, you're not." But then something cracks behind Carly's eyes. She leans in close. So close she spots a streak of Pond's cold cream still white on Magdalena's jaw, breathes in the Vicks Magdalena smears nightly on her chest, its sharp smell pricking her lungs, and hisses, "Do not tell me what I can or can't do." For that one electric moment, Carly feels infinite. Flames ignite deep in her breast, the words spill like golden smoke between her lips. A woman, she is a woman now, after all, and will claim her own power. But no sooner have the words left her lips than they are replaced with a gasp, her grandmother's palm popping hard against her mouth, quick as lightning from a blue Galveston sky. This is giving me flashbacks. It isn't so much the force of the smack, but the shock that snaps Carly's head back. Magdalena has not struck her in 3 years, not since she was 12, grounded from going with the other junior high cheerleaders to Moody Gardens for the day because she made a C on a social studies test, and she stomped her foot in the doorway of Magdalena's bedroom, declaring, "My real mom will love me enough to let me go." The slap she earned that day still reverberates in her muscles on occasion, when they drive past the apartments on Holiday where she knows her parents had lived, but Magdalena looks purposefully straight ahead, or when she catches Mrs. Suwayan or any of the other Filipino ladies at Sacred Heart watching her during Mass with faces like scales, weighing her against the woman they once knew, but of whom Carly has only cobweb shreds of memory. But this has nothing to do with her mother, not this time. She simply wants to borrow the car and drive herself to Katy, where Jess is playing in a summer baseball league his mom insisted he do to keep his skills up during the off-season. And maybe she only has a learner's permit, but hasn't she been driving for nearly a year? All over the island and even into the Bay Area a couple times? Can't she be trusted with this quick trip up for the morning game, bringing the car back before Magdalena's Saturday shift at the school library is over? She makes her case, her voice calm, that won't last long, and she smiles hopefully. "So can I, Grandma?" But her grandmother snorts, "A game? So vas a ir an hour away through the city for a game? Because you can't watch Jesus Maria play any day of the week right here?" Laughs and shakes her head, making Carly seethe with the injustice of it. And then the fight, their voices rising and falling, the slap that ends it. As if Magdalena were not a rebel herself. Carly knows her grandmother's independence like no one else. Her "no me digas que no," a famous refrain around Fish Village. And here Carly tries to show her own, yet earns nothing but a smack on the mouth. There must be pride in there somewhere, Carly thinks, as she huffs and turns away, her lips smarting, listening to her grandmother call, "You're not going because I said so, y se acabó," through the slammed door. Somewhere deep down, doesn't she feel approval for her granddaughter's grit? Doesn't she marvel? So the next morning, Carly steals the car. But steal is a strong word, really, as she insists later that evening, loudly over Magdalena's howls, for what essentially amounts to slipping the spare key off his hook and coaxing Hector to give her a ride across the island to where the Harris Elementary staff parking lot sits nearly empty except for her grandmother's Grand Marquis and a handful of cars belonging to the other janitorial staff and library assistants preparing for the start of summer school. Then, unlocking the marquee with shaking hands and sliding into the driver's seat, adjusting the mirror and seat, and easing out of the parking lot onto Broadway, heart jackhammering against her ribs with exhilaration and fear. She feels the slaps already, hears the scolding and screaming she will be in for tonight, but still she believes that Magdalena will admire her spirit. How can she not when it is hers? The one she gave Carly, the one she fostered when both parents cast her off. And even though Jess's team will lose the game, despite him going 3 for 4 and snagging a line drive on a diving catch worthy of SportsCenter, and afterwards under the bleachers as he tangles his hands in her hair and she presses against his sweat-stained uniform when she confesses about the car, and he laughs so hard he almost collapses, telling her, "You're gonna be in so much shit, babe. I don't know if this was worth it." She knows he is wrong. It is worth it. Not his game, not him, but the drive. Pushing down the gas pedal, on, climbing the causeway with Galveston Bay glinting gray and green beneath her. Forward, 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 the hot air whipping her hair, fingers clenched around the wheel. Please, please, please. Drivers zooming past and changing lanes at light speed without a care as she sings loudly along with 97.9's Hour of Tupac to drown out the fear burbling in her throat, focusing instead on the delight. The joy of the road riveting beneath her and unfurling in the rearview mirror into familiar shapes with nothing she recognizes up ahead. So I'm going to skip forward. I'm going to skip forward. I'm going to read this last part. Am I still doing okay with this? This is okay. I'm going to skip ahead and read forward to this last part, which is towards the last third of the book. So as Meredith mentioned, this is set largely in and around Hurricane Ike making landfall in Galveston in 2008. And though we do see sort of the origins of some of these characters early on, we come to see them in the immediacy of the storm arriving. And there's a few characters who we hear from in the midst of the storm, from the point of view of the ones who stayed, which is very true for Galveston Island. And what happened, and part of why the devastation was so bad was that many people stayed in place and didn't want to evacuate for a number of reasons. And so this is from the point of view, this is a story, and I'll just read part of it, from the point of view of a character who is one of the ones who stayed. He's an elderly man. He lives across the street from Carly and Magdalena, and he's lived there for many years, as we'll hear in just a bit. He has a history with Magdalena Castillo. And he is hunkering down because what you need to know is that his wife has been in the hospital and she's being evacuated. Hospital patients were able to be evacuated to other hospitals, and she's being evacuated to Dallas, but they won't take family. So he decides he wants to stay. He's going to hunker down. He's going to last it out. He's been in Galveston for his whole life, and he thinks he can handle the storm. And it is important to know too that his name is Ike. So he also feels that he has some sort of connection with this storm that is about to make landfall that's named after him, he thinks. So I'll just read a bit from this chapter, which is called God of Wind, Storm, Fire. So thank you for listening. Ike is hammering the first square of plywood into place when the surge reaches Albacore Avenue. He knew it was coming. He felt the same flutter on the back of his neck that he did on the mound when he spun the ball, hurling his arm in just the right way. His fingertips tingled beneath their nail beds. Come water, he thought, and it slithered in. I should note he's a retired baseball player. He squints behind his prescription glasses and watches the brown liquid trickle over the weed-bedraggled lawns on the north side. The surge. Ike's still hundreds of miles away, and its pressure so strong it raises the level of Galveston Bay, pushes the water towards the island from the bayside. The seawall along the south edge guards them from the ocean, but not their own bay. A sneak attack, like the military formations his father watched in old movies studied in history books. While they were watching the seawall, the storm slunk past and approached them from behind. The wind has strengthened too. It whips around him and races through the high, thick-leaved palms, the mismatched houses of Albacore Avenue, over the brown bay water steadily creeping onto the street. Since it is already here, Ike takes his time boarding the windows. He loves this house. It's 1 story and 2 bedrooms. Its faded blue siding and white trim. Even the pink oleander trees planted in the front. They came with the house. When they moved here in year 12 of their marriage, Catherine pointed to him and told him a story she'd heard about a troop of Boy Scouts camping on Galveston who unwittingly plucked branches off an oleander tree and stripped them clean, then spiked their hot dogs and marshmallows for roasting. The next day, their scoutmaster found them dead. Every, Catherine said with solemn pauses, single one. That story's nada, Ike responded with a laugh. An urban legend, though it's true that oleanders really are poisonous. They had confirmed it the next day. They were unloading boxes when Mrs. Castillo first crossed Albacore Avenue. She walked over to where he stood beside the open tailgate of his Chevy. She took in a quick dart of her eyes, the dark brown of his skin, the Aztec warrior nose, just as he did her. When she spoke, it was in Spanish. She knew he could answer. Bienvenido, she said. Ike wiped cardboard fluff off his jeans and took her outstretched hand, her grip firm and strong. Magdalena Castillo. Mucho gusto. Her husband was watching from the window across the street, Catherine from the doorway behind Ike. Mrs. Castillo gestured to the rosy blossoms, the slender branches of the tree in the yard. If you handle the oleanders, wash your hands good, she said. El veneno, tú sabes, and bad spirits. Sí, claro, he responded. She was in her late 20s, younger than him, but he recognized in her a deep respect for the old ways. He knew that if he told her of his former game day rituals, she would nod solemnly. Mrs. Castillo was short, stocky, black hair falling loose around her eyes and down to her wide hips. Pointed chin and high cheekbones that made her look young. Black eyes that made her look ancient. Ike felt a tingling in his fingertips beneath his nail beds. Touch, touch, let the locks slip through his hands like rain. Years from this moment, Ike will fist his hands in that hair, say her name, the shortened version of it that not even her own husband called her anymore, Nana. But in year 12, he stepped back, proud of his control, and smiled at her. He drives the last nail home, and the plywood stays in place over the windows. He moves slowly, carefully down the stepladder. His softened, fragile body and its limits frustrate him. Across the street lies the pale yellow house where Mrs. Castillo, as he has tried to call her in his private thoughts, afraid of the power her nickname holds over him, lives with her grown granddaughter, the husband peering from the window, long dead. They must have evacuated too. The windows are boarded and only one car sits in the drive. He listens for the coming rain and hears it whistling, snatched up in the wind. The surge has grown. Inches of water slink atop the street. Ike is waiting. Candle flames quiver in the darkness and he feels as though he is in a seance. He's never been in one though, so he doesn't really know what he would actually do. He switched off the power hours ago and he glances at the leather wristwatch that was his father's to see. It is 10:28 p.m. That glass dome of the sky darkened swiftly after the rain came, only a few hours after he headed inside and locked up. In the wavering candlelight, he wrapped furniture legs in plastic, moved boxes of Catherine's jewelry and family photos and bank statements to upper shelves, lifted potted plants off the floors and the counters, stuffed towels beneath the front and back doors. All the while dazzled by the wailing of the wind, the way the house moans and leans into it. In the guest room, he is stretched out on the lowest portion of the bunk bed that was given to them in year 9 of their marriage. The bed is made of oak, sturdy and shining. Catherine's brother in Houston gifted it to them after her 3rd miscarriage, when the sight of the crib Ike had assembled made her wail, not unlike the wind now, shrill and dark, a frenzied sound. He wonders what a seance is like. He flicks the lighter, though he has not smoked since year 39, he still carries it, and touches it to the unlit candle wick beside 2 others on the dresser. If he knew more about seances, he might try to summon the heart of the hurricane. Speak Ike to Ike. He flushes a little at the thought. He is sure he's being ridiculous, and if Catherine could hear his thoughts from Parkland Hospital in downtown Dallas, she would laugh at him. How mystical you become in your own old age, she would tease. And though she wouldn't say it, he would hear in the air between them, how Mexican, how Galveston. Perhaps he is, this Ike. Perhaps he regards the handful of years he has left like seashells in his hand, wanting to hold them gently and turn them over, marvel at their beauty and cruel unknowability. Grief, bitterness, romance all around him. Catherine would scoff, but he is no longer afraid to feel wonder. He smells the water before he sees it, a scent of copper and salt, both natural and unnatural, and his eyes fly open in the flickering dark. Water seeps beneath the door of the guest room, a trickle. No rushing sounds, no flashes, a steady creeping. Hurricane Ike has entered the house. When he swings his feet to the floor, the rug squelches. I'll stop there. Thank you all. Am I staying there? I just stay there.
So we have time for questions. And I have a mic. I can bring it to you. If you just raise your hand. Yeah.
So in our creative writing class where you previously met a few of us, you mentioned how you wanted to hear multiple different voices and multiple different characters to make sure you had a wide range of the setting and the story and that kind of thing. But I was wondering, maybe like your father, why you decided to still keep it in stories and maybe not compress certain ones into chapters or something like that.
Yeah, it's a good question. Novels and stories are kind of tricky beasts, right? They're interesting to see. I love the form of novels and stories. I love story cycles. I love linked story collections. Whatever you like to call them, I'll read them. And there was something really fascinating to me about the idea of not one larger story that has room for characters and snippets of their lives, but rather a chorus of many stories. Carly's Galveston is not Ike's Galveston, it's not Magdalena's Galveston, and that's not Ophelia's Galveston or Luz's Galveston, and all the number of people who read this book. So what I loved is the idea that I could show, even though it's a fracture or fragment of their life, it's something a little bit more coherent and cohesive than just a paragraph with them, one chapter with them. I wanted to show each of these characters as being capable of having their own story that even though the rest of them may not know about it, the reader gets to know about it, we get to know about it, I get to know about it. So that's why the form felt neatest for me. As soon as I knew there were going to be a number of voices, I wanted to give them their say. I wanted to give them time on the page to tell a bit of their story, more than maybe just one long narrative would be able to do. So in that way, it gets described a lot as sort of like a mosaic. Yeah, I love that idea, which is just like these numbers of like beautiful, small, perfect images that collaborate to form one bigger image, right? That's exactly how I think of this book.
So, with all the different voices in your stories, how did you approach writing each voice, and was there a difference in your approach?
That's a good question. Yes, there was a difference. I mean, each character kind of became real to me even when they weren't on the page yet. And so I tried to give them room in my head, if that makes sense. When I was writing each of these chapters, I treated it like its own novel, its own short story. And then when I compiled them together and I looked at it as a novel of many voices, I tried to still keep each one their due, even as I was also doing the challenging task of looking at it as one larger whole, right? That's pretty tricky. But I did want to give each of them their time. And so when I went through the novel, with some of the characters, many of them crop up in different chapters, right? Carly appears in many of them, Magdalena, Jess, and they'll show up again and again. And I tried to treat the entire book as kind of like a Where's Waldo. I was looking for all the places with Carly. And I thought I had Carly in my head, and then I went and revisited Carly in all of the stories. In addition to like the time I had spent with each chapter, with each story, and just trying to tap into Mike, for example, or tap into the Filipina aunties who were in the opening chapter who were like bickering and talking and gossiping, of course. And so it was a bit tricky, and that I had to learn as I was revising it as a novel. So when I was writing each story, just worrying about like that little gem. Then later I had to paraphrase Sanderson's notes, I had to treat it as a necklace, right? Instead of just as a string of pearls, instead of just one individual pearl. So it's a little challenging. Every now and then I'd have dreams, like from Carly's point of view. I think after a while I was like, I need a break. But I think as writers, we're trying to capture these voices. We're trying to make them feel distinct. I didn't want Ike to speak like Garza. I wanted Ike to feel like a real person. So I did try to give them room in my head and room in my fingers, and then move on to the next. Yeah, organization is huge when you're dealing with a collection of stuff, right? Poets in here know that better than me, but it's all about timing and effect. When they read this, when a person reads the opening and it has this tone and this voice and it mentions Maharlika and it mentions Carly, we're going to carry that with us into the next chapter where we see Carly being a brat and stealing her grandmother's car. We're going to carry that into the next chapter where we see Carly as an adult trying to care for her ailing grandmother. So I took it really seriously and I did it many times. It was constantly being rearranged. And I did mention this in one of the classes yesterday. The only parts that didn't change were the opening and the ending. Those actually stayed true, which I felt very proud of myself because this went through many eyes and hands, my agent, my editor, and they often have better eyes than me, but those were my instincts of where it was going to start, what opening breath and what last gasp it was going to end on, and they believed in it, and they agreed, and they kept it there. But a lot of the middle was changing around. I used, many times when I work in creative nonfiction especially, I like playing with fragments. I like playing with an essay or a form that's just a collage of many things. And I like the challenge of having to arrange them in a way that makes sense to a reader and how you can rearrange it to give a different meaning to the reader. And so I think I just kind of struggled with what would make the most impact to someone else because I knew at a certain point what made the most impact to me. And so I had to trust other eyes at that point to tell me what felt like the right note. And what we did end up hitting on, just for the sake of some kind of spine, some kind of clear through line, I should say, in the book is it's largely chronological. I think there's a few moments where it jumps a bit, but for the most part, the opening chapter is the earliest one. It takes place the earliest. It's when Carly is 6 years old and her mother is still around. And the next chapter, Carly's a little older. The next chapter after that, wherever Carly is in the universe, she's a little bit older than that, but it's a different character's point of view, and so on and so forth. And it does disrupt it a bit at the ending, because the ending kind of throws a wrench in everything. It becomes a glossary, and it changes the landscape of the book a bit, but it serves as an epilogue of sorts to what happens to each character after the book ends, and also we see Carly in an earlier time of life. So I still kind of play with it a bit, and I can't really. Every now and then I flip through and change that, but no, you can't. You have to let it go. I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, thank you. My other question was, how do you come up with the title? Like when we're writing creative nonfiction stories and different stories, the last part of was, how do you come up with that title and what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I don't think I really mentioned it earlier, and it didn't come up in any of the parts of the readings that I read, but the Karankawas were a group, or I should say are a group of indigenous people who originally settled most of the coast of Texas. They encountered Jean Lafitte, they encountered Cabeza de Vaca, they were some of the original inhabitants, and like many people, or maybe a few in this room, who took 7th grade Texas history, we were taught that they died out. We were taught that they went extinct and that they were vanished people, like Rotan or something. But as more recent histories have emerged, they're still here. They practice. They have groups. They have peoples. They have families and tribes in different parts of Texas and beyond. And history has overlooked them. So there are real people. And in the book, Magdalena believes that she and Carly are descendants of the Karankawa. And she is of the mind that they are gone, and she and Carly are of the last. They're among the last people. So while the book doesn't really give specific information about the Karankawa or their history, it's really more about Magdalena and Carly and the rest of the characters of the book thinking about who are we, where we come from, what does it mean to call a place like Galveston or Uvalde or Brownsville or any of the places that I mentioned in the book, what does it mean to call them home if you're either not from there, or if you're a recent immigrant, or if your parents were immigrants, or if your parents were there when it was not called Texas and it was called Mexico. So I like the idea that calling something the last Karankawas, which is kind of a should have an asterisk next to it because that's not real, right? But I like the idea of questioning like history with that title. So it was the title of the story, the first story that I wrote that ended up being the heart of the book, and it felt like the title of the book.
What is your favorite dinosaur?
Did you say dinosaur?
Yes.
Favorite dinosaur? Okay. All right. Hold on. Favorite dinosaur. All right. Well, favorite dinosaur. Okay, this is gonna date me a bit, but I grew up on the land before time. So my favorite dinosaur is, I believe the scientific term is a long neck. Oh, we're too young for that, right? A brontosaurus is what we used to call them. Are they still around? Like that's still a thing, right? Brontosauruses? Brontosauri? I don't know. Yes, the long neck ones, right? Those are still my favorite. I love them. Yeah. Anything else? Now I'm on a dinosaur kick. I'm going to be a dinosaur question. I'm kidding, don't please don't. Cool.
I have a question.
Like, we can do. I
I have
can.
a question.
Okay. Anybody else? Anyone else have a question? Please. No? Okay.
I've never, like, I've read Ignition before, but I never heard.
I really can't really.
Oh, you really? That's so strange. I'm so loud. But listening to you read Ignition out loud, I really noticed the beats and the rhythms, and I felt myself like kind of like fluffing and grooving along, if that makes any sense. And I don't know if it actually is, but do you read out loud your stuff
Yes.
when you're in there?
Yeah, I should read all of my stuff out loud, and sometimes I get too lazy and it's deadline, and I'm like, you know what, F it. It sounds fine. And it doesn't, I get called out. But yeah, I do. I think it's really crucial, and it's a challenge because I write prose, so it's not like reading a short, 2-stanza poem aloud and listening for the beats and the line breaks. It's like pages and pages of my stuff. But I do think it's important because it changes my way of reading for the better. I listen to I hear my own tics, I hear my own natural inclinations to do beats or pauses or to keep the sentence moving or to kind of close it off really quickly and get the rhythm being really staccato. So I think it's overlooked. I think as fiction writers, I'm guilty of this too when I teach, but I often emphasize things like in the content, right? Like the plot, the setting, the character. As my students love, world building. But I think it's slept on to think about our prose, right? The diction and the rhythm and the music and the lines, because that is also going to have just as much weight to a reader who's moving through it. And especially something I didn't think about until I published this book is audiobooks, right? Like I love audiobooks, but I didn't think about the fact that mine would be an audiobook at some point. Not something that you should be thinking about as you're writing, but something I probably should have thought about when I was editing this. The way a reader will read this out loud. So there are places where I love the audio version. I'm very, very proud of it, very grateful for it. And there are places where they read it where I'm like, wow, man, I should change that one. But we are where we are. So I highly recommend reading your stuff out loud when you can, whenever you can.
What was the hardest part about writing this for you?
About writing this book? Oh, all of it is hard. How do I do this? Go do something else. No, the whole thing is hard. And the hardest, I think the most challenging, is sort of twofold. One is like hitting the emotional beats that were very close to my heart, but especially the one, and this is a book about parents, about kids and people growing up and thinking about where they come from. And I was editing and writing much of it immediately after my mother died. So that was really hard, like kind of challenging myself to move forward and to keep tapping into that. But I do think it made the work better. You take care of yourself to some extent, but I did keep coming back to it because I knew it would only be in service of the heart of the book, right? Carly and Magdalena and Maharlika. And the second part that was really challenging is that I ended up editing most of this during spring of 2020. So spring and summer of 2020 when we were all quarantined and nobody was coming to my house and hanging out with me, and it was just me and my thoughts. emails from my editors who were quarantining in New York, right? So it was a lot of isolation, a lot of compressed, like, writer's room time, which is not how I roll normally, and was really challenging. But I do think it all ended well. It did give me time and space to do this. But that was, there were some rough nights. Like, I spent all day by myself, all day with my words, and I was like, I'm tired of myself. Like, I'm gonna go watch some Netflix.
As is very tradition, every time we have one of these readings, we ask this question.
I was like, I'm sorry, it like echoes weirdly. I couldn't hear that part anymore.
Every time we have a reader here, we ask this question. What are your thoughts on Beyonce?
On Beyonce?
Yes.
Oh my God. No, Queen. Queen bee, you mean? Yes, let's refer to her with her proper title. No, man, Beyonce's from Houston. Like, we rep H-Town. Yeah. we rep our Texas queen. Yeah. Beyonce's perfect. Everyone move aside. Yeah, Beyonce's perfect. Goals. That's a great question to ask everybody. Do people get up here and say they don't like Beyonce?
People have said that they don't know. They're like, oh, I don't listen to Beyonce, I'm not sure what my thoughts are.
Oh, no. I have Renaissance on my phone right now. I'm pretty sure I was listening to it as I was getting ready to come here.
One of the last readers we had said that she was scared to answer the question because she didn't want to be high.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have the right answer, so like, but yeah, if that's the right answer. If you got anything other than that, he has to come for you.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else.
I love ending on